Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to this session in which we'll discuss 7 to 8 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, a very important announcement, which is the last date to join Sarmad Sir's Platinum Batch for free is today, which is 19th June at 7 p.m. For the past 3 days, we are having free sessions. You can join this session by just using the link in the description box. And further, the 7 p.m. session gives you a feel of what it means to be a part of the Platinum program and what are the contours and features of it. So you should use the link and it will help you. You just have to register. Everything else will be shared with you. So good morning. So do remember 19th, today is the last date to become a part of a free session of Platinum Batch. The PPT of this session will be uploaded into the Telegram channel which you see here. You just have to scan this QR code and have to become a part of the Telegram channel. Further, you would know that tomorrow, which is Friday, at 8 p.m., I will be holding a very important session, that too on world history, in which I'll be covering all the revolutions as mentioned in the mains syllabus. You just have to subscribe to the channel, go into that session and click notify me. We will discuss American Revolution, French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. All three revolutions will be covered in that session. This is the first part of a two-part marathon which I'm going to run. The second is going to happen on 25th. And in that session, I will cover First World War, Second World War, and Cold War politics. So these two are geared for both type of students, beginners also, and the students who are going to write the mains examination. This will give you enough understanding to write good answers for the examination, specifically GS paper 1. So do remember the last date to join Sarmad Sirs. You can just go and experience what it means to be a part of the Platinum program. And as I said, you have an opportunity to join me tomorrow for a marathon related to revolution. Now, good morning. Let's start our discussion for today. Why Anglo-Carnatic War is more important than others? Because Second Anglo-Carnatic War, as it is called, Carnatic Wars, the British and the French got involved into internal politics of India. While First and Third Carnatic Wars were more about the Austrian War Succession and 7 Years' War, this is where they will start to now play with the understanding within the Indian subcontinent. Same here, Arjun. Okay. Now, we are now seeing multiple articles fallout of the Iran-Israel war. But the first one being oil prices. What is the reason for it? What is the mechanism? What is happening in the background? Then we'll talk about a conference just 2 days back. It concluded itself, which is the UN Oceans Conference. What are the conclusions which have come out? As it is, international organizations is important for the examination. Then we'll talk about a very interesting article from a very esteemed faculty, a very, you can say, a specialist in India-US relationship, which is how do we need to reset our relationship. There are multiple things which are telling us that the trend is not as it should be. We'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about the G7 and what has gone wrong in the G7 itself. And then three important but smaller articles for the prelims examination. One report coming from the Education Ministry, then Croatia and India going for bilateral understandings. And last but not the least, again, we start with the fallout of Iran-Israel. We end with the fallout of Iran-Israel, a very unlikely outcome, which we would not have thought of in that regard. All of this is in the Delhi edition. The two articles which you see here, these two, you will only find it in the Delhi or international edition, which is basically the concept of text and context. If you have a regional edition of the Hindu newspaper, you will not find it. Okay. We'll do that, Muskan. If that is the need of the hour, we'll do that. Okay. Can we start? Everybody's here. Good morning. Yes, great. So the first topic deals with the rising escalation in the Iran-Israel war. And therein, there has been now what are called as domino effects and cascading effects, which you can see now in oil prices and even Indian exports and imports in that regard. Now, what is the reason why these prices are going up? There are multiple words here which you need to know. What is Brent and what is the concept of the different types of crude oils which are in circulation, and what is that choke point which basically they are trying to control and will in turn have a rippling effect or a domino effect on. Now, why are we having this discussion is because the Brent crude futures, meaning the future price of what is called as Brent crude oil, went up by 9% before it again cooled down to a 2.4% increase per barrel. But this was in a way a rippling effect of what Iran and Israel are doing. And specifically, this cooling down has happened because Tehran has said that it would be ready for a ceasefire. But because both these powers are very important in the Middle East, specifically for strategic purposes, and Iran for oil purposes itself, it is important that we understand why is there a certain cascading effect. Do understand one thing very clearly. Tehran, which is Iran's oil, has US sanctions on it. So other than China, no other power is importing from Iran. Even India has very restricted oil imports from Iran. Therefore, this increase is not because of the supply chain disruption per se with regards to supply from Iran itself. It is because Iran has been threatening to hit the Strait of Hormuz and make a choke point. We'll talk about that, what it means. First, you need to understand what is this Brent crude. So when we talk about crude oil supply in the world, there are two types of crude oil supplies. One is called Brent, the other one is called WTI, which is the West Texan Intermediate. This is mostly coming from the US. Considered very sweet, the sulfur content is very low, very light, and more expensive than Brent in that regard, because it is more, you can say, sulfur content being low means that the refining capacity is better, and therefore this is transported mostly across the US along railway lines, and it is a landlocked transportation system for WTI. WTI supply is mostly meant for the Americans itself, but the most common supply which India also uses and imports in that regard is Brent. And this is where the sulfur content is a little bit higher, but most important, it is transported across the world via water. It is a waterborne transportation based oil, and Iran sits at a juncture or at a point where from the Persian Gulf, if anybody wants to enter the Gulf of Oman and into the Arabian Sea, the Strait of Hormuz is something which Iran overlooks. And this is where the problem is coming through, because the supply of Brent crude oil in this sector goes through this strait, a choke point in that regard, and Iran is threatening to block it. And therefore, it is not because Iran is supplying the oil itself, not that. It is rather that it has a indirect presence and control over this strait, and in turn can block it. Now, you would say, sir, but if that is the case, give us the volume of oil which goes through, and is it significant enough to impact the world itself? And this is where this article gives us very interesting data. Again, does not matter that you learn it. It's just that you have to understand the importance of the Hormuz Strait and Iran's presence in that. It is believed that in this strait, close to 20 million barrels of oil, Brent oil, on an average goes through each day. In 2024, this was the basic average in that regard. 20 million barrels would approximately mean one fifth of global consumption. And if we take into account the oil which UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Iran, Iraq itself is supplying to the world, it accounts for one fourth of the global supply of crude oil. And further, 84% and 83% of crude oil and LNG is actually meant for Asian market. This means that one fifth of the global consumption and one fourth of the global supply is based on this trade itself. And therefore, it is a strategic point which Iran holds. And if Iran hits this or makes it problematic to transport oil of this sector, obviously there will be increase in price. And that is where the concept of a choke point comes through. The Hormuz Strait is wide enough to have all of this trade very, you can say, easily, but a temporary potential delay in supply because of a conflict, traffic, or any form of, you can say, disruption can increase the shipping prices, increase the insurance prices, which in turn would culminate in rising energy prices in. And therefore, the Iran Israel fallout or rippling effect is that because Iran is in a way threatening to hold on to this sector and in a way also disrupt the trade in this sector, it means that because of supply chain disruption, there can be now a point that crude oil prices start to go through. And we have already seen that in the futures prices increasing by 9%. 9% is very high. However, you have a certain, you can say, de-escalatory point which is coming through in that regard. So we believe that once Tehran comes for a deal or an agreement, it will become more or less sure that this will again cool down. Now, for you and me, what matters is how does India get impacted, which is what is India's position here. Firstly, tell me if this made sense to you, which is the concept that there is a certain supply chain. That supply chain is one fifth of the global consumption, one fourth of the global supply. It is a strait, therefore it is in a way a choke point. Iran has the potential to disrupt that. That in turn led to a certain fear within the market itself, which automatically came out in the process of a 9% increase in the futures of Brent oil. And thereafter, it cooled down to what is called as 2.4%. Now, the second thing which you need to understand is how does India get impacted? Because at the end of the day, it is India and it is our interest which matters in the larger story. Now, as I told you, when we talk about Tehran and Iranian oil, the government as of right now is saying that this is within what is called as the benign range of fuel prices, or we'll say crude oil prices. And because we have in the past 2 to 3 diversified our supply chain, it is believed that more or less, this should have a very short term and maybe a very minimal impact on the Indian oil prices and economy in that. However, experts are saying with 80% of all fuel demands, crude oil demands in India met via the process of what is called as imports, India should make sure that we have enough oil reserves and at the same point of time enough diversified channels, because there is a chance that this further escalates and creates a global supply chain bottleneck. So yesterday we discussed what is the core issue, what is the end game here. Now today we are discussing the rippling effects. First rippling effect is oil prices go up, and over and above that, it is important to note that these oil prices going up are purely based on the way Iran can hit this sector, not on Iran supply. This is a very simple, straightforward point which this article wants to make, that why are we seeing a rising price trend? This will automatically cool down if this conflict goes into a ceasefire or ceases to exist in that. Right? Now, how does UPSC frame a question? Some of you wrote the answer in the chat box yesterday. If you see, I have also replied to you. I have talked about what are the points, if the introduction is good or not. You can check the yesterday's session comment section. Whoever has wrote the answer for these type of questions, I have replied. I have told you if the points are good or not, if the introduction is good or not. So you can do that. You can always write it in the chat box and I will give you the answer. This summary of all of this, only one thing, which is Brent crude oil prices are going up because the Hormuz Strait can be hit by Iran. That led to fear 9% increase, cooled down to 2.4%. And yes, Anushka. And thereafter, India has a chance, or rather, India has to be wary of the fact that this 2.4% increase would affect Indian economy. India's argument is that at the end of the day, because we have diversified channels and as it is, Iranian oil is going towards China, we really don't need to worry about that too much. But because 80% of oil which we consume is imported and it is purely based on the global supply chain, and 84% of all oil which goes through the Hormuz Strait is going towards Asian markets, it has a potentiality to create a disruptive environment. Now, UPSC will ask you a question like this, which is the recent escalation in Iran Israel conflict could alter the energy market and its outlook. Do you agree? So it's not per se asking you about Iran and Israel. It is asking you about its cascading effect on energy markets and the outlook. This is where any student, if he's writing or she's writing more about the Iran Israel conflict, then you will not fetch marks. You have to talk about in the introduction the issue per se, but thereafter, in the body, you have to concentrate on discussing the parameters which we've discussed, which is one fourth of global supply, one fifth of consumption goes to the Hormuz Strait. And because Iran has the potential or has the location, strategic location to disrupt any form of trade to that sector, it has threatened to do that also. There is a trend of what we call as fear, and that has now, in a way, transpired into or converted the fear into what is called as prices going up. Supply chain issues can come through, and in the conclusion you should say that though India has diversified channels, it still has the potentiality, it still has to hold on to the concept of how we in a way minimize the impact. Because yes, we don't take Iranian oil, but because Iran supply can be hit if Israel escalates this further, that would create a cascading effect in the market. Either it is supply or supply chain. Here it's a supply chain issue, not a supply issue. Got it, everyone, with regards to this concept? Yes. Okay. Now, moving on to the second article. This one is important because it has international organizations and multiple commitments which have been talked about recently. So, the United Nations Oceans Conference recently happened, within which there was a lot of talk about a certain treaty. And that treaty is called Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement. Something which is called BBNJ. This will be in the news now quite a lot. And you need to know what this conference is, what is BBNJ, what is the issue, and what are the different agreements which happened on the sidelines of the United Nations Oceans Conference. So the members met in Nice in France, and 56 countries out of the necessary 60 have ratified what is called as the BBNJ agreement itself. It's called the High Seas Treaty. Now, first things first, because we are going from 0 to 100, we have to discuss what is the United Nations Oceans Conference. This is a standard question which can come in the examination. Now, the first time when they met was in New York in 2017. Thereafter, in 2022, they met at Lisbon. And in 2025, they've met now in France and in Nice. And the idea is very simple. This conference tries to talk about the collective resources of the marines, the concept of life under the water, life under the water or in the oceans. And its main focus is how we can stop water pollution, how we can mitigate climate change, how we can use the biodiversity. And because after our exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles from the coastline itself, there is international waters, it is more about how do we engage as nations in international waters, which have a lot of resources. So, in the third edition in France itself, the most important you can say the most important conclusion, or you can say the most important discussion, was about marine protected areas, which is that we need areas where there should not be mining, there should not be what is called as deep sea mining, there should not be overfishing, there should not be trawling, and therefore the idea is overfishing, deep sea mining in marine protected areas should be controlled. And this is where BBNJ also comes into the context, that we need to have a treaty which in turn allows us to use the shared resources properly. But there's a certain issue in that which we'll discuss. You need 60, there are only 56. And all states have to first sign the treaty and then ratify it. The ratification is the problem. We'll talk about that. The idea is very simple. The United Nations Oceans Conference is about international waters, its resources, its shared, you can say, exploitation if you want to use, or shared use in that regard, and how we need to create marine protected areas in which we can protect the biodiversity, the genetic diversity, the general, you can say, effects of climate change. How do we mitigate all of that? And therefore, this is a very important treaty as of right now. Will remain in the news because of the bottlenecks which are coming through in this conference itself. But now the point is, what is going on with regards to BBNJ? Now, when this treaty with regards to beyond national jurisdiction biodiversity came through BBNJ, 160 countries signed it and the ratification process started. However, to make it legally binding, that a nation has to abide by the commitments and the rules, 60 countries have to ratify. Half, you can say, not half, but less than half, 60 countries have to ratify. The ratification means you signed it, and now the parliaments or the national laws or the, you can say, state legislature, nation state says, yes, we accepted and we will now create a regime around it. That ratification has only come from 56 countries. Four countries still remain. And much like the US has not ratified it. India has also signed it in the process of ratification. If the next four nations are going to ratify it, you will have capacity building programs which will regulate marine genetic resources and support the marine biodiversity also. But there's a problem. The problem is coming through on the concept of shared marine resources. Now, before I talk about this, what have we understood till this point? We know there is something called the United Nations Oceans Conference. We also have understood that there is a certain, you can say, treaty or agreement which it is trying to push, which is about biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, the High Seas Treaty in that regard. And it is to protect the biodiversity, stop overfishing, creating marine protected zones. It is not UNCLOS. Remember, this is not law of the seas. It is Oceans Conference. Where, Vishal, this is the first thing you should know. This is a totally different agreement. We are talking about United Nations Oceans Conference. And there, yes. And therefore, you have to understand that there will be an issue of what is called a shared marine resource. UNOS, OOC, plus the idea of BBNJ, and the idea that this will allow us to create a regime beyond the exclusive economic zone of the countries itself. Now, what is the issue here? What is stopping 4 to 5 countries to actually ratify it? See, in international waters, which would be beyond 200 nautical miles from a certain nation itself, you will have exotic and rare marine species and biodiversity. Now, the problem which is emerging as of right now is that if that is the case, do we extract them? Do we protect them? If we are extracting them, what is the purpose of it? If we are protecting them, how do we protect them? And because there are multiple points which have been, you can say, multiple zones within the Atlantic Ocean, within the Indian Ocean, which are now very, very important for what is called as rare earth metals, the polymetallic globules or nodules, which are there at very, you can say, deep seas, but also is very important for the future of rare earth metals. The issue is, if you sign a treaty like this, you will not be able to become party to a certain exploration or marine extraction program in that. That is why you see 160 countries signed it, but the ratification is only 56. The interest of developing nations, the interest of developed nations is that we need to also have access to these rare earth metals and also exotic rare marine biodiversity. So, what is actually becoming a problem, an issue within BBNJ, which could stall it further, though the UN is saying that it will be done by September and we will have the COP, the Conference of Parties, by 2026. The idea is very simple. There is stalling by multiple nations because of the potentiality of, for example, with regards to the Arctic Circle and the receding ice. We believe that there's a lot of oil in that sector. Now, if you are party to something like this, it would be problematic to then extract oil out of that. And that is where there are long term implications for having a legally binding treaty such as BBNJ under you. So, this is the first issue, which is BBNJ has long term implications. India also needs to weigh in all the options. India is looking for, just today, we got news that in the Andaman and Nicobar Island sector, we have found oil. It is believed to be a $20 trillion, though we still have to establish that. But what the minister is arguing is it has the potentiality to have resources close to $20 trillion worth of. So, therefore, if we become part of something like this, it would then become problematic to even explore that sector and in turn creates over our own economic resources issues. Yes, we have to weigh in the option of economic development and environmental protection, but we don't need a third party such as the UNOS OC talking about this and making us sign multiple waivers and then we giving international access to this area also. So, to be very, very fair, we have to make sure that we don't hastily enter into this conference because it will, or rather, this treaty, because it is going to create an issue for us in the long run. Now, other than this, there were multiple things which happened on the sidelines, meaning multiple agreements which were, or commitments as they're called, which came through. And what I've done is I've listed them. There are total, you can say, 9 agreements. Again, agreements, commitments. Will they meet it is a separate issue. For example, the European Commission said that it is going to give 1 billion euros for ocean conservation, science, and sustainable fishing. Again, a projected understanding. Then, French Polynesia said it is going to create world's largest marine protected area, which is going to cover its exclusive economic zone. But a country like in the Polynesian sector, the French Polynesian sector can do it because they don't really have resources in that sector. Further, New Zealand said we will give, don't have to learn this, just giving you an understanding. $52 million to enhance ocean governance and science in Pacific Islands itself. Germany said that it is going to remove all the munitions which were dumped in the Baltic Sea and the North Sea during the First and the Second World War. And that is where it is going to clear that so as to create a better environment and better biodiversity based, you can say, ecosystem within the Baltic Sea, within the North Sea. 37 countries led by Panama and Canada said they are going to create a high ambition coalition for a quiet ocean wherein they will reduce noise pollution which is happening because of the engines and the big, you can say, uh, be it military or be it civil, you can say, boats in these sectors create a lot of noise which in turn hampers or even affects the biodiversity in the oceans itself. Again, this is called the West based commitments. They make big commitments. If till the next 2 years this is going to stand, it's a separate issue altogether. All of these are just concepts which they want to do. If they will do it, it's a separate issue altogether. Italy said it is going to create or strengthen with 6.5 million euros investment in surveillance in oil platforms and protected areas. Further, Canada argued it is going to create an ocean risk and resilience action alliance, which is going to go for climate resilience in that sector. Spain said we are going to have 5 new marine protected areas itself. And thereafter, UN agencies together argued that we will create one ocean finance. But if you have any idea about how global noise pollution means, because of the ships and their engines, there's a lot of noise pollution vibrations which go into the water. That is not good for the marine, you can say, biodiversity in that regard. Science in Pacific Islands is to protect those islands and also do research on how climate change affects them. See, you can see 9 commitments, very big, look very resounding in that regard. When it comes to finance, UN is the worst organization to ever count on because we've still not got any money under the Green Climate Fund. So all of this just is big conferences, big commitments. Because none of these commitments are legally binding on the nations itself, they can always backtrack. So do understand one thing, that this conference is going to be in the news. You will see multiple articles on it. I've given you the base knowledge about it. I've given you the understanding what it actually means and what are the basic commitments which are this slide is going to be important for you if you are creating a repository of international organizations and their commitments. Now, how does UPSC ask a question? It can very simply ask you a very straightforward question like this, which is, what is UNOC? What are the main objectives of the organization? Simple 150, 250 word question. If you don't know about this organization, then you will struggle to write an answer in GS paper 2. So please do use this resource to create a better understanding. Right? Are we clear about the first two articles? First one talk about the idea of crude oil prices, Iran and Israel. Second one is about an organization and its commitments and BBNJ. Two things which you should know now. Important, yes, both for mains and prelims, because you can get a prelims based statement based question and you can get a mains question on what, for example, a question like this. You can always write the answer in the chat box. I will be happy to see if you're writing the right answer. Ratification and conference of party means, ratification means once the treaty is signed, it has to be accepted by the state legislature. That is ratification. And conference of parties is when the whole ratification is done, the organization is clear. Then the nations which are a part of it come as conference of parties. Right. Okay. Now this is a very interesting article coming from an expert himself, Amitabh Mattu, and he is the you can say a specialist of India-US relationship. He served as the Indian National Security Council Advisory Board also. He is a professor of international relations and he has multiple very interesting things to say about India and US partnership. Now this is where he paints a certain picture. He paints a certain picture, and now that picture needs to be understood and we have to understand something. See, he talks about the Trump presidency and Trump's presidency now in the US. Are we all on the same page? Yes. Repeat the meeting of 3 meetings. First one in New York, the second one in Lisbon, the third one in France. Yes. Okay. Now, Trump and his presidency, his second stint as the US president, has been quite significant for India and has been quite significant for the world itself. Now, what he argues is that this relationship started at a very high note with regards to multiple conversations between Trump and our prime minister. Even the external affairs minister was present at the inauguration of Trump. There was a lot of, you can say, positive news coming through, and we believed that Trump was going to, as he was previously, in a way, good for India in the larger scheme of things. But he's arguing that since the tariff, you can say, wars was started by Trump, there has been a drift. The word which he uses is drift. And that drift is that it's not a schism, it's not a breakage of the relationship. The drift is from a positive to a negative space in that. And this is where he tries to articulate why this drift is happening. What are the reasons for it? What is the solution for it? So, the larger picture of this article is three parts. Why the drift? What is indicative of that drift? And what are the solutions to that? That drift is a certain, you can say, space where from convergence, we are going into divergence. We saw that with regards to India, Pakistan itself, how Trump uncalled for because of Pakistan request intervened. The whole concept of the ceasefire now being nominated for the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize. There are multiple things which are happening in the background, and it is not as per what India would like the India-US relationship to be. So, what I'm trying to establish to you is what is the structure of the argument, which is the idea that what is this drift, why the drift, and the solution to it. Right? Three parts. So, first, let's try to establish in what things do we see the drift, or what are the indicators of the drift, I would also say, or rift between India and US in the past 4 to 6 months. He points out to multiple interesting things. First is the ceasefire itself and the US involvement in it, and the way the US dealt with Operation Sindhu. Second is on June 18th, Trump had a dinner with no one else but Asim Munir. And in multiple cases, he has talked about how Pakistan is a reliable partner. He said, I love Pakistan. He loves a lot of things, but he talked about how he has a certain fondness for Pakistan. Third, he talked about the H1B visa issue and the deportations which are happening. The fact that he is pointing out that H1B is used by Indians or misused by Indians. He further talks about how the Apple CEO was discouraged from developing more plants in India. He said that there would be great or grave consequences to the simply the concept of Indian based iPhone manufacturing. And therefore, he said you should not expand in India further. We have also seen one very, very dangerous type of, you can say, statement which has come through, where the United States Central Command Commissioner, he has remarked that Pakistan has been a phenomenal partner in counterterrorism. It's like calling the tiger or the lion the most important protector of sheep. The same country which perpetuates terrorism, state sponsored terrorism, actually is being talked about as a phenomenal partner who's helping counterterrorism. This is purely delusional understanding, wherein they are not ready to accept what Pakistan actually is. It's pure delusional understanding on the part of the US Central Command Commissioner. And if we add to this the tariff barriers, the percentage, and the way Trump said that India is misusing the US aid or even the grants and the tariff, I think this gives you a very interesting perspective on how this relationship is going down for sure. Looking at this whole set of five, you can say, points, it shows us that there is a lot of friction points which are developing. Does not mean a breakdown of this relation. But hosting Asim Munir is a little bit too much. And this is where I have previously also argued whilst teaching world history and in the CNAs itself, that America is a finicky power. It's a moody power. It cannot be trusted. And this is what is coming out also in this article, that America is doing what it does best, which is be such an unreliable partner that good we did not sour our relationship with the Russians, though there have been strains with the Russians also. The larger context here is very simple, that looking at all of this, the US is doing something which it did previously, and that is called, is this fine? Is the picture fine? Because I want to go further. First part I have established. Everybody, I would want everybody's consent. Right? Okay. Why are they denying Apple? Because they want Apple to produce in America, which is itself not possible. Now, based on this, you can say analysis or looking at the trend, what we believe is what is happening is something for which India has worked for now decades. What is called the concept of hyphenation of India and Pakistan. See, for a very long time, if you look at the rhetoric in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, there was something called the hyphenation of the relationship between India and Pakistan, meaning even in US documents, Pakistan and India were used together as a hyphenated area called hyphenation. This hyphen is called the hyphenation concept, that like Trump, they were talking about India and Pakistan always together. And India worked for the dehyphenation for a very long time. And in the politics of the US, there was a trend in the 2010s and under Obama, and even in the first term of Trump, there was a concept of dehyphenation, which is that India is, we will deal with India separately, we will deal with Pakistan separately. However, we are now seeing a context in which now again they are talking about India. In the same breath, they are talking about the same. Not understanding that this only complicates the journey between India and the US and the relationship of the Indian and the US consulates. And Trump is now doing what he does best, is again destabilizing something which was previously considered to be a done deal. Meaning, India was extremely happy with regards to the concept of dehyphenation. Within the internal communications within the US also, it was always dehyphenated. But now there's a hyphenation that India and Pakistan have to be considered together. Now, what could be the possible reasons? What are the reasons for this drift which is coming? I hope you're understanding how this is a very well structured argument which is arguing that there are these certain trends. This talks about hyphenation, and these are the reasons for that. Now, the first reason which he points out very candidly and very interestingly is the concept of Trump administration transactional approach. Now, this is where India has always had a patient, calculated, convergence based, clarity based approach. Meaning, when we approach the US, everybody should do this also. When we approach the US, we approach it in a patient, calculated way. But the Trump administration is tit for tat. Meaning, if we are doing something positive, we want something in return. We want something in return. This transactional and quick short term gratitude based understanding, where we should go to the US and say thank you, oh Trump, thank you Vance, you helped us, thank you so much. It's like they want short term gratification and they want a transactional relationship. You stopped the war, thank God, if not we would have been destroyed. It is thank God for the Pakistanis that they intervened, if not we would have further hit them. Yes, there would have been collateral damage, but India had an upper edge when the ceasefire was taken. So, very simply, the transactional approach of Trump, that, oh, Trump, thank you so much, that is what convergence means, coming together. We always try to bring both interests together. Trump is like, my interest is most important. You tell me. And that is where the Pakistani Prime Minister nominating Trump for Nobel Peace Prize is something called transactional. That I will stop the war, you nominate me for Nobel Peace Prize. This is where Trump's administration is flawed itself. And we can now not further trust them because they always want something for something which they did. Yes, it's pure quid pro quo. Now, the second thing is Trump himself is unpredictable. We know today morning he will say something else. Tomorrow morning he will say something else. After 1 month he will say, when did I say it? He's that way is a pure, you can say, has a certain fascist tendency, which is he's very manipulative. He changes his lines very quickly. So I can hit the Iranian supreme leader, but I don't want to. I know where he is, but I don't want to. This is called the understanding where he creates a certain rhetoric which has to be held. He's a pure businessman, but very bad at poker face because he mostly shows his displeasure very quickly. So Qatar gave him a plane. He was happy. He was extremely happy. They brought in a McDonald's truck for him. So happy. And therefore, that is where, yes, the idea, we will discuss that very soon. The concept that we should add Russia and China to G7 to make it G9. He has his own understanding. That is where Trump is very unpredictable. And the idea that he sat with Asim Munir and had dinner means that he does not know what type of monster he is sitting against. If he knew what that person stands for, a sane and rational person would never even eat or drink with that person. But he has his own ways. Further, he argues that in US national security, there is something called the Pakistan angle, and the idea that it is a familiar but flawed partner. There's a certain jingle which is used for kurkure in India, which is called "Teda hai par mera hai." This is what this line means. US national security understanding. Problematic hai, flawed hai, but familiar hai. It has been an all-weather partner for us because of the Pakistanis joining the Western Bloc in the Cold War politics. The whole Pakistani F-16 fleet is given by the US only. It is pure understanding that familiarity. It will help us in counter terrorism. That is where that delusional understanding comes through. Phenomenal partner and counter. It is in Pakistan where Osama bin Laden was found. It is in Pakistan where you have the genesis of most of the terrorist organizations. They believe that Pakistan is a good way of controlling Afghanistan, not understanding that there is more that Pakistan will do damage in Afghanistan than actually mending that relation. So there is a deep seated nostalgia that याद है वो दिन जब F-16. Remember that day when I gave you the F-16? That was the glorious time. This is their problem. And Trump is a good recipe, and his administration is an even better disastrous recipe with all of these things. And the last point is that we India tends to follow an independent course of foreign relations. We've been doing that. We started with NAM. We are now at all alignment. And our foreign minister, external affairs minister, has done a wonderful job in making sure that we have not soured the relationship with the Russians, but also balanced the US. IMF loan is where the idea comes through, Monu, that the problem is that Trump tells us to sit somewhere, we will not sit. That you sit here, India. We will not sit because we are independent. We are a sovereign nation. The Pakistanis have already sold their soul to the Chinese and the body to the Americans. And therefore, when Asim Munir is told sit here, or the Prime Minister is told, Pakistani Prime Minister is told sit here, they will sit because they have no independent policy itself. So basically, we are paying for our own independent policy and our own spine. Because Pakistan is spineless, Trump likes them. Because Trump likes people who do not have a spine. And that is where these reasons are now coming out in this fashion. In this fashion. And what this is doing is India is not that big a fool to just sever the ties with the US. That is not possible in current geopolitics. But India has to now calculate and make sure that this drift does not become a pure schism or gulf between these two nations in that. To be very honest, what the article also argues is Trump is undoing something which has taken decades, which is the idea that two, the biggest democracy and the oldest democracy, coming together to create an understanding wherein they create a world order which can balance China. All of this only helps China because it destabilizes the Middle East further, destabilizes the relationship further. So, very simply, Krishna, I'm not understanding what is your question. The idea is that there are multiple cases in which the administration itself has a certain orientation which does not work for India. Now, the question is, what is the solution? World order means the current geopolitics, the world as it is dominated by one superpower. Are we on the same page here? Do we understand the reason? Do we understand what is hyphenation? And do we understand what is drift and what are the indications of that? Everyone. They talk about India and Pakistan together because that demeans India in that regard. So the idea was they talk about this region and not the country. That is a standard American policy to, in a way, reduce the importance of India in the larger scheme of things. Right. But why not for China? Why we send delegates from the Pakistani? Again, you have to re-articulate your question. Power corrupts, absolute power. That is, he already lost his mind. It is not power corrupting his mind. He was already gone in that case. Okay. How does India manage this drift and arrest it? Arrest it means stop it. Because we have to. We have to. The first is we do not need to overreact. He had dinner with Asim Munir. Pakistan is Pakistan. Pakistan will do Pakistan type things, and therein it will lead to some form of fallout. It's just wait and watch game. Pakistanis are very good in destroying relationships. They will do something which in turn will irritate Trump. So we don't need to overreact. We should not be the one who should say, please don't meet him. Let him meet. Pakistan will do something for sure. Now, second is We need to use deep cooperation, the concept of logic. For example, Quad and defense partnerships, these should be used to reduce the Gulf. Thereafter, we need to quietly persist in calibrated diplomacy and use the soft power of diaspora. Meaning, there is a very big diasporic population. We should use the soft power, which is the cultural power of India, to change his understanding. And we need to have calibrated diplomacy. We cannot have a heavy handed approach here. We can't have that. That is not how you deal with the US as it is. Fourth, with regards to H1B visa issue, we should talk about skill, we should talk about talent, and we should talk about how it is not a misuse but an opportunity. And that is where we again have to reel in the diasporic population, that it is the Indians who are contributing significantly to the population itself. And last, we have to restore the moral purpose, which most probably would not get restored with Trump, in the partnership, which is to protect democracy and create better democratic rights. This is where the author quotes a very interesting point. The he quotes a very interesting line, which is that the strength of a relationship is not in the moments of celebration. The strength of a relationship comes at the moments of stress. So if we are not able to reduce this drift, then it means that whatever we did in the past 5 to 6 decades has now gone down the drain because it was all artificial. It was purely artificial, which means that whatever capacity building we did was not good enough to create a certain relationship which was strong enough in times like Trump. I cannot even say that this is the last term of Trump because, yes, US presidents are bound to have only 2 terms, but he is that type of personality who can even do a constitution amendment there. He will find some logic to it, he will find constituency there. Senate as it is, he controls to the Republicans. He can even amend that also, that a sitting US president or a US president can contest elections even after 2 terms. So you never know with that person. So I hope that this comprehensive understanding has been fruitful in that regard, because what I've done is I've made a question out of this article. It's a very beautiful line. Are the recent tensions between the US and India going to squander a generational opportunity to build a democratic concert in Asia? This is exactly out of the article. Squander means destroy, and a concert means association. Meaning, in Asia, for a very long time, India and the US used to argue we are countering China. Countering China was important, and that is where India US relationship had come together. But remember one thing for sure. Remember one thing for sure. When I will teach you world history tomorrow, and when I will teach you world history on 25th, First World War, Second World War, Cold War politics, you will realize one thing. There are no permanent enemies and allies in world politics, and the US is the most unreliable partner in the larger scheme of things, because you never know what they will do. Extremely moody power. One day they will act like India is India. Oh my God, India, you are the best. Next time they will ignore you. And that is what is happening right now, where though there are sideline talks, we are talking about a lot of things, but the way the Americans are acting right now is they are blatantly ignoring the issues of India. And that is where what we felt, what we went through during the Pahalgam attack, after that in the Operation Sindoor, they are blatantly ignoring. That is where it will be a test of time and patience on our side, can we make this relationship work? Right? Three big articles, two text and context, one out of what is called as the editorial itself. I'm moving to the fourth article out of the editorial, but I hope these three made sense to you. Very interesting ones in Iran and Israel, fallout in Hormuz. Second, based on the understanding of UN Oceans Conference. Third, and this is where these articles become very important, beautifully written, very well structured, and rightly so, he was part of the National Security Council in that regard because he is a specialist of this relationship. Right? Okay. Can I move to the last editorial topic and then the three subsidiary topics? Can we do that? I want everybody's consent here. Come on. Yeah, this one is very interesting, very well written also. Multiple times in these type of articles, what happens is authors confuse themselves and confuse us also. But he has articulated in a very beautiful way and very structured way. He's created an understanding. So that was well, very good read and also enjoy teaching something like that. Right. Okay. Now comes another fallout of Trump only. So we know that the G7 is happening, and the Indian Prime Minister Modi was also called. He was invited to the G7 summit also. Germany, UK, France, Canada, US, Italy, and Japan met. It used to be previously G8. Now it has become G7 after Russia, Ukraine. And if you do see, it can't be that you've not seen this. So, what has actually happened is a lot of things have happened in the G7, but we as Indians only remember this. Multiple interesting songs have been pushed into Instagram and on YouTube, in shorts, in reels. You'll find this because somehow this is the only thing which is important right now. But what this article points out is there is something more than this itself. Meaning, this is good, beautiful. But on the sidelines, there are multiple things which prove that this summit was problematic and is what a total failure in that. So I'll use this slide itself so that you can also admire uh, things which you want to see in this. Whilst I do that, I would like to talk about the fact that how the G7 has been a failed summit. Now, the first thing which has been talked about is it is one of the biggest G7s which was disunited and you can say ineffective in that regard. Now, you will say, why? Why is that? Now, the first thing is the G7 failed to talk about Ukraine and Russia because we already know that Trump has taken a pro Putin route and Zelensky, the Ukrainian head of state, was ignored throughout this summit itself. So the issue is that they failed to talk about Russia and Ukraine. Second, the US abstained from voting or creating a joint statement on Iran and Israel. Meaning the US said, we refuse to sign on the declaration that Iran should go for a ceasefire and Israel should stop the war. And the US, obviously led by Trump, very simply failed to show a united front. Again, I told you, be wary of these Americans. Thereafter, Trump even argued that the G7 should be made G9. And how to make it G9? Add Russia and add China. Both, one a friend of India, the other one a irritant for India. Which countries are a part of G7? Basically, the Second World War countries, basically Germany, UK, France, Canada, US, Italy, and Japan. Previously, Russia was also a part of it. Now it is not. Further, there was no talk about Trump's tariff war. And therefore, it's like all of them met for a holiday. Nobody wanted to talk about nothing. It's like you fought with your uncle, with your maternal uncle. There was proper fight between your father and your uncle. Proper fight. And now when it's a marriage, everybody's acting like kuch hua hi nahi. Proper kalesh has happened across the world, but nobody wants to talk about it. So basically, they said, Russia, Ukraine, अच्छा, कुछ हो रहा है? Then said that Iran, Iran and Israel, okay, got to know today only. Further, they said there was a proper escalation between China and US and across the whole world, the whole tariff war started by Trump. But Trump, no, nothing happened. Galti se. So, if you actually look at it, it is one of the worst G7 meetings when it comes to taking an action on something. So nobody wanted to implicate the US, nobody wanted to talk about Ukraine, nobody wanted to talk about Iran, Israel, nobody really wanted to talk about the concept. Trump rather said, let's expand it further, let's add China, let's add Russia. Russia was removed for as a statement. He said, no, let's bring back. Why G8, G9 बनाते? घर को और बड़ा करते. हम साथ साथ हैं. This is what he's saying. This is why Trump is dangerous. But what we are obsessed by, what we love about this is this picture. सारे दुख मिट गए. There is no issue whatsoever. India was invited by Canada. Though, see, one positive which has come out of this meeting is that Canada and India have now agreed to have high commissioners, and most probably the diplomatic channels which were destroyed during the Khalistan issue will now be restored. But Canada did not give a statement on Khalistan perspective or on not allowing the Khalistanis from using its soil against India in that. So what this article says is that it's a failed summit. And it is a failed summit. Because if you look at the track record, if you look at what actually was happening or is happening and what was there, it is purely a failed summit. Because the only positive is the Canada India understanding, but thereafter Trump left in between. There was no joint statement which came through. G7 is the set of the most important nations who should take a stand, not go there, have a picnic, and then get a picture clicked. This is where it is not India. India was invited to the G7. We can't do anything. The agenda is not set by India. The agenda is set by the developed countries. But they would rather want to act like nothing is happening. It is purely the world is burning. But they're like the weather in Canada is. That is basically the only. The only positive thing is India-Canada relationship. And as Vishal said, something which is on the reunion in that regard. So please do understand one thing very clearly, that G7 is not doing what it should do. And this article talks about how there is a futility of this effort now, ineffective, disunited G7. I hope you get the point of this article. Other than the point which is on the screen, you get the point of the article. Yes, this is not a good thing, because if multilateral institutions just become a gimmick, then the purpose of the group was to take multiple important decisions, united fronts, give unite joint statements, tell the world where the world order is. But other than that, they're doing everything. It's become a gimmick. It's a pure rhetoric gimmick. They all come together, they act like everything is fine, and they go away. So, sir, China should be a member of the G7. For India, that is not a good thing. It is only the G7 and these Gs which are actually the institutions which are free of Chinese presence in that regard, as of right now. It is not a good thing. So, if Trump is saying that China should be added, he's basically scared of the Chinese when it comes to how the tariff war was going on. United Front means everybody comes together. So, with this, let's go into the 4 articles, small ones, not something out of the box. I hope this made sense to you. Let's talk about a report which has come from what is called Performance Grading Index, PGI. PGI index or Performance Grading Index, as launched by the or as prepared by the Education Ministry. And what is important here is that the PGI index 2.0, what it takes into account is outcome, quality, access, infrastructure, equity, governance, teacher education, and training. Total 1,000 points are there. Meaning, based on these indicators, you can get a score out of 1,000 points. Now, the beauty of this report is, and that is where the interesting part is, no state in India got between 761 to 1,000 points. 761 to 1,000 points. No state. Meaning, every state is in the second grade as of right now, not in the first grade, which tells you the state of education in India in that. 24 states have improved their, you can say, improved their score, and 12 states saw a decline in their score. Further, you have UTs, including UTs. You will say, sir, it is not adding up, including UTs plus states. So the highest performer in this was the UT of Chandigarh, 719. It was in grade 1. Thereafter, no state in grade 2. State grade 3 included 10 states and UTs, Punjab, Delhi, Gujarat. Obviously, you can't learn this, but just to give you an understanding. Further, lowest performer was Meghalaya with 470. If I go further down into the analysis, the states between 461 to 520 have significant room for improvement, including Telangana, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Nagaland. And between 521 to 580, you have most of the states and UTs. Best improver in access of education, Bihar, Telangana. Please learn this. Learn this. And best improver in infrastructure, Telangana, Jammu and Kashmir, and Delhi. But to be very honest with you, we should not be very, very happy that there is no state which is in 761 to 1000. This is not a good thing. Taking into account quality, outcomes, access, infrastructure, equity, teacher education, and training. So that ways, we have a very big task in our hand where we can go forward as a nation, at least as for education purposes in that regard. So please do make sure that you learn this part, because other things, Uttar Pradesh is here, 521 to 580. So please don't learn their ranking according to marks. So when the state were given marks, everybody came as second division only. That is the irony of this story. What I've done is I've made this, there's a lot of data in this article. I've made it digestible, and I've given you 2 things which you should be able to learn, which is best improvements in that. Right? The last 2, quickly, not something very substantial. India and Croatia are coming together in 2 very important spaces. One for space ventures, and second for defense cooperation. And India and Croatia together coming for semiconductor technologies, digital technologies, agriculture, pharmaceutical, all of these things. We are now creating a new partner in the European sector so as to become a better partner. It can become an, you can say, a destination of defense exports. And also, who releases education ministry? This is when the government of India told us. Imagine if the third party would do something like this. Is Ministry of Education data. Unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you want to use the word. So Croatia and India are going for better bilateral defense ties. Let's see how it translates. Just wanted to give you an update that we have one more partner in this. Last, we end with also the fallout from the Israel and Iran battle, something which is quite unlikely but very interesting. Because of the Iran and Israel conflict, rice and tea exports from India has been hit. We would have never imagined that Iran is the largest market for Indian basmati rice. Of the 6 million tons of annual exports, 1.2 million ton goes to Iran itself. And out of one of the major exporters, close to 20,000 to 25,000 tons of tea goes to Iran. What is happening is because of the Iranian, you can say, bidders not being there in the export market itself, the prices are following because there's oversupply. Now, why am I telling you this? Because you should understand these 2 points. You should learn this point, one, and you should learn this point, two. If you learn these 2 points, it will help you in contextualizing everything together and creating a very good understanding in that. Right? So we have done today 6 to 7 important articles. You learned about the UNOC, the BBNJ, the concept of India and US relationship getting, there's a strain in that regard. And we also understood the concept of how there is a trend which is emerging. The Iran and Israel issue is having cascading effect on oil, tea, and rice. And we further understood how G7 is failing in its larger understanding. And we also tried to understand how we have to change our orientation towards US and manage that the best way possible. And we discussed the PGI, the Performance Grading Index of state. So on this note, I'll end the session. Please do post your answer into the comment section. I will for sure go through it, tell you if there are points which can be added. I've given you 4 questions to figure out. Chirag, I don't know what you are. No, 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 no. I can understand it. No, those are two very different systems. Is there any positive for Trump administration to India? As of right now, Divyam, only is that if we go by the track record previously, it could become better. We have seen that Trump was pro India previously. He could also do that in that. Not taking any action, not even doing something generally, which is that they are ignoring all the major burning points in that. A mains initiative, as I told all of you, yes, tomorrow I will be there with the revolutions. I'll discuss French Revolution, American Revolution, and Industrial Revolution in one class. Meet me at 8 p.m. tomorrow for that session. Thank you. Take care.